Hey everyone, Nike here. In the past, I've been pretty vocal that seaweed salad is insanely overpowered relative to other direct damage foods, and that the seaweed salad syndrome, or the wiggling back and forth, is not only silly but actively detrimental to the game, and I have been a proponent of nerfing this food for many months. With that said, I think we are in a pretty unique place from a raid perspective, where balance is considered by most people to be rather good, with the exception being Necromancer and Revenant overall. I do not feel at this point, though, nerfing Seaweed Salad is justified, and I'm going to explain why. First, condition damage builds are now equal or better to power builds in several boss fights as it is. This is actually entirely reasonable and fair. Condition damage builds have longer ramp-up time, so from a balance perspective, it's pretty reasonable for them to have a higher damage ceiling overall. Other than Condi Thief, most DPS builds in the game fall between 31 and 33k DPS on the benchmarks, which seems to be about the target range that ANET likes. The problem is the two main power DPS builds, Elementalist and Guardian, are at the bottom of that range and absolutely could not take a 5% hit if Seaweed Salad was to be nerfed to 5% instead of 10, as is rumored. Going from 32,000 DPS to 30,000 DPS would render them distinctly non-viable relative to the condition damage DPS builds in the meta. Obviously, then, you can't nerf Seaweed Salad without also nerfing the 20% Condi Duration foods. Even nerfing the Condi Duration foods to 10% would still leave Condi damage builds way ahead, as they would lose about 800 DPS from changing Earth Sigil to Malice, whereas reducing Seaweed Salad to 5% costs the Ellie about 2200 DPS. So you'd have a Condi nerf, so you'd have to nerf Condi food even more, changing it to something like 100 expertise and 70 condition damage, which would get them much closer to parity. So that puts us in a place where our original goal was at least partially to eliminate the silly Seaweed Salad syndrome, but we've progressed to a full-blown, across-the-board damage nerf by 5%. Now, perhaps you might argue that a 5% damage nerf across the board isn't a big deal, or you might argue that it's actually a good thing to lower damage across the board. For the former, I would say it's a very big deal to reduce a team's DPS by around 10k. In a 5-minute fight, that's an additional 3 million damage, which does extend the fight quite a bit. For the latter position, I would say it's irrelevant insofar as that wasn't the goal of this process. It's important to remember that in game balance, you don't really want unintended side effects that are more impactful than the base change itself. This would definitely be a case where removing the silly wiggle has a massive unintended side effect. In fact, I'm probably underestimating the unintended side effects. It's entirely likely that even if the damage reduction was perfectly equal across the board 5% for both Condi and Power, that there would be certain meta builds that are no longer considered viable. There would be a chain of dominoes, and I don't think that anyone could entirely foresee how they'd turn out. And frankly, if the current meta was terrible and only one profession was viable as a damage dealer, you know, I might advocate just shaking it up and seeing where the chips fall, but that is not where we are right now. Every profession except Revenant has a viable DPS build, which is a level of balance we've never had before in raids. Should we really risk that just to nerf a single food by 5%, even if that food does create a quote-unquote silly wiggle? As they say, to me, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. My strong recommendation is that they should not fix what isn't broken. Sure, buff Condi Reaper slightly, buff Revenant by about 10%. Heck, go ahead and lower Condi DPS by 10%, so long as you don't hurt the Condi pure DPS Condi build. And with those changes, we'd be in a ridiculously good balance situation. We don't need to nerf Seaweed Salad. And frankly, I think we do not need to tinker with something that's working well. Do not tinker with a good thing. Do not try to fix what isn't broken. Thank you guys for watching. I would like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.